Everyone says the golden age of affordable vintage Japanese motorcycles is over. And if you're looking at Honda CB750s or Kawasaki Z1S, you're probably right. But there are still a handful of incredible classics that collectors have mostly ignored, at least for now. In this video, I'm counting down the 5 vintage motorcycles you can still buy at surprisingly reasonable prices before the rest of the market catches on. Let's get into it. Coming in at number 5 is the Suzuki GS850. Introduced in 1979, it was Suzuki's answer to riders who wanted a comfortable, reliable touring motorcycle without stepping up to the full-dress Goldwing. It featured an 843 cubic centimeter air-cooled inline-4 producing around 75 horsepower. While it was shaft-driven, which was very unusual for motorcycles during this time, it did have an engine that earned a reputation for being nearly bulletproof. And one thing about these motorcycles is that they were incredibly smooth, which is what you want with any touring bike. As far as parts go, you're really in luck here because parts are very, very easy to find, and there's a huge GS community that has kept these bikes alive for decades. And it goes without saying, as far as the carburetors are concerned, be ready to work on those because a lot of these bikes have been sitting for several years, so just be ready to clean and synchronize them. And I know what you might be thinking, why is this bike on your list? Well, to be completely honest with you, it seems to me all the collectors and everyone else is chasing the GS1000, while the 850 flies completely under the radar. Coming in at number 4 is the Kawasaki KZ650. And honestly, I think this might be one of the most underrated motorcycles Kawasaki ever built. When most enthusiasts think of the classic Kawasaki 4s, they immediately think of the legendary KZ900 or the 1000. Those bikes have become collector icons, and because of that, prices have climbed dramatically over the last decade. But while everyone's chasing those bigger bikes, the 650 has quietly stayed affordable. Introduced in 1977, the 650 was designed from the ground up. It wasn't just a smaller version of the 1000, but they built it to be lighter, more nimble, and easier to ride while delivering the smooth power that made the inline-4 so popular during the time. The 652 cubic centimeter dual overhead cam air-cooled inline-4 is going to put down around 64 horsepower, and it all comes wrapped in a 500-pound package. That really translates into a great handling bike, especially on the back roads and the twistiest. It's quicker to turn in, it's less intimidating, and it just feels generally more playful. As far as ownership goes, parts availability is still pretty good. Mechanical components are pretty easy to find, and there's a strong aftermarket thanks to the popularity of the entire KZ lineup. However, cosmetic parts are a little bit more difficult to find, especially if you're trying to restore one to a factory condition, but they're definitely out there. As far as things to look out for with inspections on these, typical items such as, crusty carburetors, weak charging systems, the rusty factory exhaust, which are all pretty common for motorcycles of this era. The KZ650 is number 4 on my list because it offers nearly everything enthusiasts love about Kawasaki's legendary inline-4s without the big collector price tag. You get the styling, the sound, the reliability, and a bike that's genuinely enjoyable to ride, but often for thousands less than the 900 or the 1000. Pricing on the 650 can vary widely depending on where you are, but you may find examples out there from $1,900 all the way up to $3,500 in decent riding condition. So, if you can find one in that price, I think there's a good bit of appreciation that could happen in the future on these particular models. Let me tell you something, if you're looking for reliable motorcycle accessories that can make your rides safer, more comfortable, and more enjoyable, take a look at the links in the video description. We've found some great products at excellent prices. At number 3, the BMW R80. And yes, I already know what some of you are thinking. A BMW on a list of affordable classics? Well, hear me out. Yes, the R80 is a little more expensive than some of the Japanese bikes we've already talked about, but I don't think it's overpriced. In fact, I think it's one of the best values in vintage motorcycling. It was built in the 80s. It's powered by an 800 cubic centimeter air-cooled boxer twin, producing around 50 horsepower. So, given those facts, if you're looking for speed, this is not your bike. But if you're looking for a motorcycle that feels like it could ride across the country tomorrow, this is really hard to beat. A big reason these bikes have earned such a loyal following is their simplicity. Valve adjustments are incredibly straightforward. The shaft drive means very little routine maintenance, and these engines have earned a reputation for running well past 100,000 miles when they're properly maintained. BMW deserves a ton of credit for continuing to support these old airheads. Parts availability is still excellent, and there are entire businesses dedicated to keeping these motorcycles on the road. That's something you can't say about every vintage motorcycle. So, let's talk about the elephant in the room: price. Good rider quality R80s generally sell somewhere between $2,800 all the way up to closer to $6,000, depending on where you are, obviously. With exceptional clean examples bringing a ton more. So, is it going to be more expensive than every other motorcycle on this list? Probably. But you're getting an incredible motorcycle that was engineered to be a premium touring bike from day one. When you add up the incredible comfort, build quality, and reputation for lasting decades, I still think that these bikes are undervalued. Now you'll want to check for oil leaks around the pushrod tube seals and make sure the charging system is in decent shape. And ask whether the drive shaft splines have been serviced, as those are all common airhead maintenance items, but none of them are deal breakers if they've been looked after. While prices on classic Japanese motorcycles continue climbing, the R80 is still sitting in a pretty sweet spot where you can buy a genuinely iconic vintage touring bike for less than many modern lightweight motorcycles. I don't know how long that's going to last for. So, this is a big reason why it landed on number 3 on the list. Number 2, the Honda 750 Sabre. The Sabre was built in the early 80s, and Honda was pretty much just showing off how much engineering they could cram into one motorcycle. It featured a 748 cubic centimeter V4 engine, 6-speed transmission, shaft drive, hydraulic clutch producing around 80 horsepower. Now, speaking of that V4 engine, although it does have a completely different character than the inline-4, it's really smooth and torquey, but there's a few things you need to watch out with that motor specifically. Many of those early V4s suffered from camshaft wear due to oiling issues, especially if they weren't maintained properly. You need to listen carefully for excessive top-end noise on starting up. As far as what you can expect to pay for one of these motorcycles, on Marketplace they're going for anywhere from $2,000 up to $3,500, while rough but complete projects can be found for well under $1,500. The Sabre is one of those motorcycles that really nobody talks about. I've probably met one person who had one. I've never really heard a lot about it, but the more you dive into them, they really are a great value, especially in today's market. And a special note here, specifically with the Sabre: if you're thinking about building a cafe racer, don't overlook this bike. Purists aren't fighting over these bikes the way they are the early CBs, so you don't have to feel guilty about making it your own. You got the V4 engine, which looks fantastic exposed. The frame cleans up really nicely with tail conversion. Looks great with low bars, slimmer seat, and a cleaned-up rear end. They can look absolutely killer while still being comfortable enough to ride every single day. As far as parts availability goes, it's really a mixed bag with the Sabre. The good news is that maintenance items are still pretty easy to find. Things like oil filters, brake pads, wheel bearings, seals, spark plugs, cables, batteries, that sort of thing. You're solid there. Where things get a little trickier is with specific model bodywork and trim, side covers, factory headlight fairings, instrument clusters, that kind of thing. You're going to have a difficult time finding that. So just buy the most complete bike that you can find. You know, mechanical issues can be fixed with aftermarket parts or the readily available OEM parts, but tracking down those model-specific cosmetic parts is going to be really difficult. And finally, at number 1, the Yamaha XS650 Special. So, since earlier XS650 models like the XS1, XS1B, and XS2 models have become highly collectible and are very, very expensive, this is where the XS650 Special really comes into play. It was introduced in 1978 alongside the standard XS650, and by 1980, the Special had essentially become the only version of the Yamaha 650 that you could buy. Production continued through 1983 in the U.S., and some markets received them as late as 1985. Mechanically, it's the almost identical 653 cubic centimeter air-cooled parallel twin that made the Yamaha famous. The biggest changes were cosmetic. Yamaha gave it a teardrop-shaped fuel tank, pullback handlebars, and a stepped king and queen seat. Plus, there was a lot more chrome, a smaller rear wheel than many of the other XS 650s, and a more laid-back cruiser riding position. And honestly, because of the styling, collectors have never really chased these bikes quite like the earlier standard models. But underneath all that chrome and cruiser-style parts is still an XS650. So, if we strip off the buckhorn bars, swap the seat, you can even throw on a flatter gas tank if you want, and you're suddenly going to have one of the best cafe racer street tracker platforms ever made. There's going to be a handful of known issues with these old motorcycles. One in particular, the sump pump oil filter screen, and wear on the timing chain guide, those are known issues with these. If you catch them early, they're pretty straightforward to deal with. The electric starters tend to go out on these 650 Specials as well. The starter will actually spin without turning the engine over. It'll make an awful grinding sound. That is the #1 symptom that will need to be replaced. The good news is the repair is very straightforward, and there's a lot of replacement parts to get the job done. You can find running models of these on Facebook Marketplace from anywhere $1,800 up to $3,500 in most parts of the country. For that kind of money, you're getting one of the most proven engines ever built. Whether you want to restore it, ride it every weekend, or turn it into a cafe racer or street tracker, the Special does it all. And that is why it takes the top spot on this list. And if you know someone shopping for a touring bike who keeps getting told they need to spend more, send them this video. The best validation for any bike is owners who refuse to sell them. Want to know which bikes never break down regardless of age? If you spotted your next ride or learned something new today, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us which bike you'd take on a grand tour. Ride safe, ride smart, and we'll see you in the next one.